Alright, how's it going, guys? Today we're going to be going over the biggest draft busts of the past decade. So, with the 2019 NHL Entry Draft being almost exactly a month away, a little bit short, I thought it only made sense that we go over the biggest draft busts of the past 10 years. So, to give some context to this video, I'm going to kind of explain what a bust is, because I've seen some other videos on YouTube where they say, wow, this guy who was drafted in the second round didn't even play one single NHL game. I don't agree with that. I don't necessarily agree with that because, in my opinion, anything basically out of the first round is a lottery ticket. You can't depend on your second round, third round picks to be elite all-stars. If you could depend on them, they wouldn't be selected in the second round. And for this video, I'm actually only going to be analyzing top 15 picks that turned out to be busts. And why did I choose only the top 15 picks? Well, I chose only the top 15 picks because the first 15 picks of any NHL draft are teams that did not make the playoffs. And if you aren't making the playoffs, you better hope that you're drafting, you're building your team, you're improving in the offseason. And what is the best way to improve in the offseason? It's just the draft. It's through the draft. The teams that have drafted well in the past are the teams that have the most depth, that have the best lineup, that have the best, that have the best systems where they can create and nurture their own players. Teams that just are the most well-rounded, and those are the ones that succeed in the regular season and the ones that succeed in the playoffs. And honestly, I've been noticing a trend in the past, 10, 15 years where there's less likely to be busts within those first 15 picks. And I don't know if that's just, scouting is getting better or maybe players are getting better, but it just seems like there's less and less busts every year through the first round. Obviously, there's variance between the years, but just for the most part, seems like there's less busts. Alright guys, so starting from 2008, we have Nikita Filatov. So Nikita Filatov was a very sought upon prospect. He was more of that dynamic right-wing sniper, right-wing, left-wing sniper who's projected to be like a top 6 forward. He was drafted to Russia. He had a really good junior career, in the junior tournaments. And then he played 8 games where he had 4 goals in those 8 games. So already he seemed like he had a lot of potential. He came in, he did his job. Now let's move on to the future. After that, though, he was unable to secure any type of NHL roster spot. He had a bunch of stints where he was going back and forth from the AHL to the NHL. He couldn't maintain a spot, where he eventually went back to Russia, and he's still playing there today, I believe. But it's kind of interesting with these Russian snipers. Well, not necessarily Russian, but with these more dynamic snipers, right-wing, left-wing snipers, they definitely have a lot of potential, but they definitely do have a way higher risk factor because they really depend on their, on their dynamic shot, like things that may not necessarily transfer to the NHL level. That's why I believe a current example of this is Vasily Podkolzin. Podkolzin is a really sought upon sniper, but he's been recently just dropping in the rankings because of his inconsistency, and some scouts believing he may not be able to transfer that, that dynamic play into the NHL. Up next, we have Colton-Bird. So Colton-Bird is a 6'4", enforcer defenseman who doesn't have a lot of offensive upside, but he's more relied on for his physicality and defensive play. But during his whole NHL career, he was unable to secure any type of actual NHL spot. He was getting sent down to the ECHL, and then he was getting sent down to the AHL, where he actually ended up playing 24 games for the Edmonton Oilers, of course. In 2011-2012, where he had 1 point in 24 games. Since then, he went back to the minors, and now he's just been playing the rest of his days out in Germany, where that's basically the end of his career, because he actually hasn't played the past 2 seasons, but he's still on a contract. So for a top 13 pick, you don't want to see, 24 games as a sought upon, physical defensemen, which are more assumed to transition to the NHL game easier. Because, there's a lot of players, a lot of defensemen, like, for example, Erik Branson, where they may not be that offensive dynamic, offensive upside defenseman, but at least they can play in the NHL. And they do have that physical aspect, where Colton-Bird couldn't even translate that into the NHL. Up next, we have another 2008 draft pick. This draft was really interesting because I feel like there's a lot of super dynamic franchise player like Steven Stamkos, Drew Doughty, and then there's a lot of busts. So we have Kyle Beech, who was selected 11th overall by the Chicago Blackhawks. He was pretty intriguing as a prospect. So he has 60 points in 60 games, which is decent. That's a point per game. Of those 60 games, he had 27 goals. But not only that, he had 222 penalty minutes. This guy was a force to be reckoned with. He was super physical, super gritty, but he also had some offensive upside. So for the Chicago Blackhawks, I'm sure that was intriguing enough for him to almost make the top 10. But unfortunately, Kyle Beech was unable to even just play one single game in the NHL. He bounced around from the minor leagues, and then he went into Sweden, then he ended up in Germany, and now he is, I guess he's playing in a second tier German league. But from being a top 10 pick, or almost top 10 pick, to never playing an NHL game, that's not okay. Up next, we're in the 2009 draft. So the top 15 of the 2009 draft was pretty solid. You know, there's some iffy picks, but for the most part, they were able to secure roster spots. But we do have Scott Glenny. So Scott Glenny was a winger coming out of a winger center coming out of the WHL. He had a lot of offensive upside. He had 70 points in 55 games. He had a really great playoffs that year, and then he continued to develop really well in the WHL system. And he ended up only playing one single game in the NHL. One single game. He was never really given an opportunity because he didn't obviously earn it. And he bounced around in the minor league system, where now he's actually retired as a 30-year-old, I guess. He's 28. So he's 28 and he actually retired. So that's pretty crazy. Because you see a lot of these players, they go to Europe where they can maintain their hockey career. Scott Glenny actually ended up retiring. Up next, we have one of the most controversial, first-round picks of the last decade, if not 2 decades. We have Nail Yakapov. So Nail Yakapov is a very interesting player. He came into the OHL and was just lighting it up. He was very dynamic. He looked like he was a potential franchise player. Coming over to Russia in 2010-2011, coming from Russia, he had 49 goals and 52 assists, 101 points in 65 games as a rookie. Now that is very intriguing. That's a rookie coming into Canada and just lighting it up. He had a really great World Juniors, U18 World Juniors. And then the next year, he did have a decent season. He was a bit injury prone, but he still put up 69 points in 42 games. He had a good World Juniors U20. And then he was drafted first overall by the Edmonton Oilers. The next season was a lockout. He had 18 points in 22 games in the KHL. And the KHL is considered the second best league other than the NHL, which I mean is subjective, but it is. So 18 points in 22 games, that's really good. He then ended up playing the rest of that season in the NHL because the lockout ended, and he had 31 points in 48 games, which is decent. That's what you can expect out of a first round pick. But after that, that's when all his play just continued to trend downhill. So now, don't get me wrong, Nail Yakupov, he wasn't the worst, first round pick I've ever seen. And if this was like a pick that went, 15th, he went maybe 12th overall, I wouldn't even consider it a bust. But he wasn't just a first round pick, he was a first overall pick. So for that being said, we have other players surrounding that draft like Nathan McKinnon, Taylor Hall, Nugent Hopkins, Steven Stamkos, John Tavares, and for him to be in that draft list and to turn out that way, that is definitely considered a huge bust. Sorry, Yak. Up next, we have probably the saddest, first round pick ever. And it's not because of his draft position or how he turned out. It's because of a trade that he was involved in. So we have Griffin Reinhart, who was selected 3 positions behind Nail Yakupov, going 4th overall in 2012. Griffin Reinhart was drafted as a more defensive, stay-at-home defenseman. He's a big body who can lay the body. He's 6'4". He had decent point production. He wasn't gonna be that offensive-minded defenseman, but he definitely was gonna be that shutdown defenseman that lots of teams can use. And the reason why I think this is one of the most unfortunate draft picks in this whole entire video is because the Edmonton Oilers traded for him in 2015. And what did they give up for Griffin Reinhart? Well, they gave up their first-round pick for one. And who did that first-round pick turn out to be? Well, I'll tell you. It was Matt Barzal. So basically, the Edmonton Oilers traded Griffin Reinhart for Matt Barzal. Let's just get that straight. That's so unfortunate. I'm not saying that Edmonton may not have chosen Matt Barzal, but the point that Matt Barzal turned out to be that pick that they gave up to get Griffin Reinhart is very unfortunate. He ended up only playing the season after 29 games where he had 1 single point and he was a minus player. Then he was shipped off to the Golden Knights during the expansion draft. But the fact that the Edmonton Oilers traded off, their first round pick that turned out to be Matt Barzal for Griffin Reinhart just goes to show that Edmonton just has horrible luck. What the heck? If Edmonton had Matt Barzal, they would be a completely different team today. And I would go as far as saying they could even be, they'd be in the playoffs today. They had McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Barzal. They would be a completely different structured lineup if they had that elite skating player that Matt Barzal turned out to be. Up next, we have the 2013 NHL Draft, and we have Valeri Nichushkin. I remember this draft pick very fondly because I remember Vancouver Canucks selected Bo Horvat 9th overall this draft, where they traded, Corey Schneider for that pick. But I remember seeing Bo Horvat was still developing in the OHL system, and I remember Nichushkin played the very next season where he put up 34 points in 79 games, which, that's very decent. But I remember thinking to myself, dang, we should have drafted this guy. He's already ready. He's looking like a good power forward winger that can score goals. But boy, am I wrong, because Bo Horvat has just been up on the projections, and Nichushkin has been going downhill. So his play started dropping. He ended up going back to Russia for a couple seasons, and then he came back this year. So now keep in mind, Nichushkin was drafted to be that power forward goal scorer. This year, he had 10 assists in 57 games, 0 goals, and he was so bad in the playoffs that he was scratched the whole time. For a top 10 pick, he definitely just did not pan out. And keep in mind, for the rest of these picks, I do believe they have some potential to, be a roster player. So keep that in mind. Players can change, players can develop. But we have from the 2014 NHL Draft, Michael Dell Cole. Now, Michael Dell Cole was a super intriguing prospect. He's a big guy, 6'3", and in his draft year, he had 95 points in 67 games, a really good playoffs. And, his development was just going up. He had one kind of rough season when Oshawa was going through a rebuild, so they shipped him off to Kingston, and then he had another really good year. He's been doing well in the minor league systems, but he just has been unable to crack a roster spot. He ended up playing 28 games this year and had 7 points, but for being the 5th overall pick and being so sought upon, he just has not been panning out. But keep in mind, like I said before, we're still in the age range here. I believe he's 22? He's 22, so he still does have a lot of chance, be that roster player again. But we're getting to the point where, your development should be at a certain point by now, and it's just not. I'll give you an example. So we have Sam Bennett and Jake Virtanen, 2 players that, if you talked to me last year, I would say they're both busts. However, this year, they did change their role. They changed their role into more of a power forward grit role, and they're really loved by their teams, and they've been creating way more value. Where, players like Michael Dell Cole, Nichushkin, Griffin Reinhart, Yakupov, they just didn't create any value for the teams they're on, which is, the most important part when you're going through your draft. Up next, we have a kind of a controversial one, but it's controversial for a reason I'll explain in a second. We have Powwows Akka, who was drafted 6th overall in the 2015 NHL Entry Draft. Now, Zach's play has been getting better, I will say that. This year, he started off kind of slow, but this year he did have 25 points in 61 games. That's just under 0.5 points per game, which isn't too bad. However, I will say the reason why I put him here is because the players that were drafted around him turned out to be, franchise player. We have Mikko Rantanen, Zach Werenski, Thomas Chabot, Matt Barzal. There's so many players that are drafted after him that New Jersey would have benefited so much from that I just don't know how I don't know how he climbed the rankings so far. He kind of reminds me of a Gabe Landeskog, so I guess that's kind of who he's projected to be. But considering the players that were drafted after him, and he was a 6th overall pick, he has not been comparing at all to the players around him. There's Mitch Marner, Brock Besser. There was so much talent there. And it's just unfortunate that he didn't pan out the way, the other players did around him. All right, and up next, we have a very controversial pick again. We have Jesse Puljujärvi. So Pulley Rv has just been a player that, he was dominant in his draft year. I thought he would have been the guaranteed 3rd overall pick, but then Columbus decided to go with Pierre-Luc Dubois, but good for them because that turned out well. Pulley Rv just dominated Liga. He had a really good season in Liga, really good playoffs, just amazing World Juniors. He was looking like just a fantastic franchise winger. But then in my opinion, Edmonton really rushed his development because that's what it comes down to. I feel like he would have benefited so much from him staying in Liga, playing one more year, and then coming over. Maybe starting from the minor league system and working his way up. But instead, Edmonton forced him into the lineup, and he just has not been doing well. His development has just been trending downwards if you look through his point production. And keep in mind, it's not like he's not getting opportunities. Edmonton's giving him opportunities with Connor McDavid, with Draisaitl. He's getting all the opportunities in the world, and his development just has not been panning out. But keep in mind, he still has a chance to turn that around next season. I would love to see it. He seems like a great guy. So, come on, Pulley Rv, prove us wrong. But that's basically it, guys. Tell me who you think if I missed any other draft busts from the past 10 years. I really appreciate all the feedback. Really appreciate all the support, guys. I love making these videos. Thanks for watching.